Picture this. You share a goal with someone close to you. Maybe it's losing weight, starting a business, or learning a new skill. They smile, nod, maybe even offer encouragement. But then something strange happens. Your motivation begins to fade. The fire that burned so bright when the goal was yours alone, it's dimming. Sound familiar? Welcome back to Audiobook Labs. I'm Tony, and if you've ever wondered why sharing your goals sometimes feels like throwing water on your own fire, you're in the right place. Today we're diving deep into what I call the science of silence understanding, when sharing your goals helps you and when it sabotages everything you're working for. This isn't about becoming a hermit or never seeking accountability. It's about understanding the psychology behind goal setting, the hidden forces that shape your motivation, and developing a strategic approach to who you tell what and when. We'll explore groundbreaking research from neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists, share real stories from people who learned these lessons the hard way, and give you a practical framework you can start using today. Here's what we're discovering together. There's a delicate dance between silence and sharing, between internal motivation and external accountability. Master this dance, and you'll not only achieve more of your goals, you'll enjoy the journey more too. One study I came across recently stopped me in my tracks. Researchers looked at people who shared their goals publicly versus those who kept them private. The results? Those who announced their intentions were significantly less likely to follow through. But here's the twist: it wasn't because they lacked willpower. It was because their brains had already given them a hit of satisfaction just from talking about it. Let me tell you about Sarah, a 34-year-old marketing manager who discovered this the hard way. She had this big dream of writing a novel. For months, she told everyone about either coworkers, her family, her friends at happy hour. "I'm going to be a published author," she'd say with genuine excitement. People were impressed. They called her ambitious, creative, disciplined. But here's what Sarah didn't realize. Every time someone responded positively to her announcement, her brain released a small dose of dopamine, the same reward chemical it would release when she actually made progress on the book. In essence, her mind was getting rewarded for talking about writing rather than actually writing. Months passed. Sarah had outlined maybe 2 chapters. Every conversation about her novel felt heavier, more awkward. "How's the book coming?" People would ask, and she'd feel this knot in her stomach. Eventually, she stopped mentioning it altogether. The goal she'd been so excited to share had become a source of quiet shame. This is what Dr. Derek Sivers, speaking at a TED conference, called social recognition, the phenomenon where sharing your goal gives you a premature sense of accomplishment. Your brain, not knowing the difference between talking about something and doing it, rewards you for the announcement rather than the action. But here's where it gets interesting, and why this isn't a simple never share your goals story. Because silence isn't always golden either. Take James, a 45-year-old teacher who decided to run a marathon. Unlike Sarah, James kept his training completely private. He figured if he told people, it would just add pressure. So he bought running shoes, downloaded a training app, and started logging miles in secret. For the first month, this worked beautifully. James felt free to miss days without explanation, to go at his own pace, to experiment with different running routes without anyone asking for updates. But by month 2, something shifted. The novelty wore off. The early morning runs became harder to justify when no one knew he was doing them. Without any external accountability, James found it easier and easier to hit snooze, to make excuses, to eventually abandon the goal altogether. The difference between Sarah and James reveals something crucial about human psychology. We're social creatures. We evolved in tribes where our actions affected others and where others' opinions shaped our survival. This need for connection and accountability isn't a weakness, it's literally how we're wired. But modern life has complicated this ancient system. Let's dive into the science. When you form a goal, your brain creates what psychologists call an implementation intention, basically a neural pathway that connects a trigger with an action. When I wake up at 6 a.m., I will go to the gym. The stronger this pathway, the more automatic the behavior becomes. Here's the fascinating part. Sharing your goal can either strengthen this pathway or weaken it, depending on how you share it and with whom. Dr. Peter Gollwitzer, whose research has shaped our understanding of goal psychology, found that when people announce their intentions to others, they often experience what he termed social reality, the feeling that their goal is already partially accomplished just because others acknowledge it. This creates a psychological trap. Your brain gets a reward for announcing the intention, which actually reduces the internal drive to follow through. It's like your motivation tank gets a small leak every time you talk about your goal without taking action. But Gollwitzer also discovered something hopeful. This effect disappears when you share your goals with people who will hold you accountable for specific actions, rather than just cheering for your intentions. The difference is crucial. When someone says, "Good for you for wanting to write a book," your brain hears approval and feels satisfied. When someone says, "Great, send me your first chapter by Friday," your brain recognizes an unfinished task and stays motivated to complete it. This explains why some of the most successful people you know seem to accomplish things quietly, almost mysteriously. They understand intuitively what the research confirms. There's power in silence, but there's also power in strategic sharing. Think about the last time you announced a big goal on social media. Maybe you posted about your new fitness routine or your plan to learn a language. How did it feel to see those likes and supportive comments rolling in? Pretty good, right? That feeling, that warm glow of approvalis, your brain getting its reward early. Now, think about the weeks that followed. If you're like most people, your motivation gradually declined. Not because you're lazy or undisciplined, but because your brain had already given you some of the emotional payoff you were seeking. This is what I call the announcement trap, and it's especially problematic in our social media age. Platforms are designed to give us quick hits of validation, which can actually undermine the very goals we're trying to achieve. But here's what I've learned from talking to people who consistently achieve their goals. They've developed what I call strategic silence. They understand when to share and when to stay quiet. They've learned to distinguish between sharing that helps and sharing that hurts. Let me share the story of Michael, a 38-year-old accountant who wanted to start his own consulting firm. Michael had failed at this goal before. 3 years earlier, he'd announced his entrepreneurial plans to everyone who would listen. He updated LinkedIn constantly, talked about his business ideas at networking events, and even had business cards printed before he had his first client. The positive response was intoxicating. People called him brave, visionary, ambitious. His ego was well-fed, but his bank account told a different story. After 6 months of more talking than working, Michael quietly returned to his corporate job, his dreams feeling more like delusions. But this time, Michael tried a different approach. He decided to practice strategic silence for the first 6 months. No announcements, no updates, no business cards, just quiet, focused work. Every day after his regular job, Michael spent 2 hours developing his consulting skills, building a simple website, and reaching out to potential clients. The work was harder without the constant validation, but it was also purer somehow. There was no audience to perform for, no narrative to maintain, just Michael and his goal. After 6 months of this quiet work, something interesting happened. Michael landed his first client, then his second. Only then did he start sharing his progress, but not his intentions. Instead of announcing what he planned to do, he shared what he had already accomplished. I just want to share that I've been quietly building a consulting practice, and I'm excited to announce my first 2 clients, he posted on LinkedIn. The response was different this time. Instead of vague encouragement, he received specific opportunities. People reached out with referrals, collaboration ideas, concrete offers of help. Within a year, Michael had built a thriving consulting firm. When I asked him what made the difference, he said something that stuck with me. The first time, I was building a story about being an entrepreneur. This time, I was actually being one. This distinction between performing intention and living action is at the heart of strategic silence. When you share too early, you risk becoming attached to the identity of someone who has goals rather than someone who achieves them. But Michael's story also illustrates why complete silence isn't the answer either. Once he had established momentum and proof of concept, sharing his progress opened doors that would have remained closed if he'd stayed completely private. So how do you know when to speak and when to stay quiet? How do you navigate this delicate balance between beneficial accountability and motivation-killing validation? Let me share the framework that's emerged from both research and real-world experience. First, let's talk about the roots before fruits principle. In nature, a tree spends months, sometimes years, developing its root system before producing visible fruit. The deeper and stronger the roots, the more abundant and sustainable the fruit. Your goals work the same way. The roots are the daily habits, skills, and systems you build. The fruits are the visible outcomes people can see and praise. Share your roots too early, and they never have a chance to strengthen. Let them develop in the quiet soil of consistent action, and they'll eventually produce fruits worth sharing. For most goals, I recommend what I call the 30 rule. Don't share your intention until you've completed roughly 30 of the foundational work. This isn't an arbitrary number, it's based on research showing that this is typically when new behaviors begin to feel automatic rather than forced. If your goal is to write a book, don't announce it until you've written 30 of a first draft. If you want to start a business, don't share your plans until you've done 30 of the groundwork: market research, skill development, initial client acquisition. If you're trying to get in shape, don't post about your fitness journey until you've established 30 of your target habits. This approach serves two purposes. It protects your motivation during the most vulnerable phase, and it ensures that when you do share, you're sharing something real rather than something aspirational. But the timing is only half the equation. The other half is choosing the right people. Not all sharing is created equal. The research shows a clear distinction between what psychologists call identity-based sharing and accountability sharing. Identity-based sharing is when you tell people something to get a reaction, to be seen a certain way, to feel impressive or inspiring. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm starting my own business. I'm going to write a book. The focus is on the identity you're claiming: runner, entrepreneur, author. Accountability-based sharing is different. Here, you're seeking specific feedback or support for specific actions. I'm training for a marathon and need someone to check in with me every Sunday about my weekly mileage. I'm starting a consulting business and would love your thoughts on this pricing strategy. I'm working on a novel and could use feedback on this chapter. Notice the difference? Identity-based sharing seeks validation for who you want to become. Accountability-based sharing seeks support for what you're actually doing. The people you choose matter just as much as how you share. Research by Dr. Heidi Grant, author of 9 Things Successful People Do Differently, shows that goals shared with supportive but demanding people, those who believe in your potential but will call you out on excuse, have the highest success rates. These aren't necessarily your closest friends or family members. Sometimes the people who love us most are the least effective accountability partners because they're too emotionally invested in protecting our feelings. Instead, look for people who share similar goals, who have achieved what you're trying to achieve, or who have a natural tendency toward honest, constructive feedback. I want to share one more story that illustrates just how powerful strategic silence can be. This comes from Rachel, a 41-year-old nurse who decided she wanted to become a published photographer. Rachel had been taking photos as a hobby for years, but she'd never taken it seriously as a potential career or even a serious side pursuit. She had this nagging feeling that she was being frivolous, that photography wasn't a real goal for someone with a mortgage and responsibilities. Her first instinct was to keep this goal completely secret. She was embarrassed by it, worried people would think she was having a midlife crisis or being unrealistic. So for the first year, she didn't tell anyone. She took an online photography course, practiced every weekend, and slowly built a portfolio. But after that first year, Rachel hit a wall. She'd improved significantly, but she had no sense of whether her work was actually good enough to pursue professionally. She needed feedback, but she'd been so secretive that she didn't know how to ask for it. This is where strategic sharing saved her goal. Rachel decided to be vulnerable with one person, her sister-in-law, who worked in graphic design and had experience evaluating visual work. She shared her portfolio and her dream, but she did it strategically. Instead of saying, "I want to become a professional photographer," which would have invited well-meaning but unhelpful responses like, "That's great. Follow your dreams." Rachel said, "I've been seriously developing my photography skills for a year, and I'm at the point where I need honest feedback about the quality of my work. Would you be willing to look at my portfolio and tell me specifically what's working and what isn't?" The conversation that followed was exactly what Rachel needed. Her sister-in-law confirmed that Rachel's work was genuinely good, but she also pointed out specific areas for improvement and connected Rachel with a local photography group where she could get regular feedback. Fast forward 2 years, Rachel now has a thriving wedding photography business that supplements her nursing income. She still works as a nurse, but photography has become a meaningful and profitable part of her life. When I asked Rachel what she learned from this experience, she said, "I learned that the goal isn't to never share, it's to share strategically. Keep it quiet until you've built something real, then share it with people who can actually help you make it better." This brings us to one of the most important concepts in goal psychology, the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from within you do something because it's personally meaningful, enjoyable, or aligned with your values. Extrinsic motivation comes from external factors, praise, recognition, money, or approval from others. Research consistently shows that intrinsic motivation is more sustainable and leads to better outcomes. But here's the catch. Premature sharing often shifts your motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. You start working toward a goal not because it matters to you, but because others are watching. This shift is subtle but devastating. When your motivation becomes primarily external, your persistence becomes dependent on continued external validation. Miss a workout? No problem when it's between you and your goals. Miss a workout when you've publicly committed to daily exercise? Now you're dealing with shame, excuses, and the temptation to give up entirely. Strategic silence protects your intrinsic motivation by keeping the goal relationship pure. It's just you and the work, you and the challenge, you and the growth. This creates a strong foundation that can later support the addition of external accountability without being overwhelmed by it. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not advocating for permanent secrecy or complete isolation. Humans are social creatures, and social support is a crucial factor in goal achievement. The key is timing and intentionality. Think of it like this. When you plant a seed, you don't immediately dig it up to show people how it's growing. You give it time to establish itself in the soil, to develop roots, to become stable. But once it starts to sprout, once it's strong enough to benefit from sunlight and air circulation, you transplant it to a visible spot where others can appreciate it and where it can flourish. Your goals work the same way. Give them time to establish themselves in the private soil of your daily actions. Let them develop roots through consistent practice, through small wins, through the building of new habits. Then, when they're strong enough, when there's something real to share, bring them into the sunlight of community and accountability. This approach requires patience, which is probably why it's not more widely practiced. We live in an instant gratification culture where sharing feels good immediately and waiting feels boring. But the research is clear. The people who consistently achieve their goals have learned to delay the gratification of announcing in favor of the deeper satisfaction of accomplishing. Let me share some practical guidelines that can help you implement strategic silence effectively. For personal development goals, things like developing a new skill, changing a habit, or improving your health tree, the 90-day rule. Give yourself 3 months of private work before any public sharing. This is usually enough time to establish new behaviors and see initial results. For creative projects, writing, art, music, starting a podcastery, the first milestone rule. Don't share your intention until you've completed your first meaningful milestone. For a book, that might be your first complete chapter. For a business, it might be your first paying customer. For a fitness goal, it might be your first month of consistent workouts. For career goals, job changes, education, professional development, be especially careful about premature sharing. These goals often carry a lot of social weight and can create pressure that's counterproductive. Share your job search only with people who can actually help with specific opportunities. Share your education plans only with those who can provide relevant support or accountability. Here's another crucial piece. Learn to distinguish between sharing your process and sharing your intentions. Sharing intentions, I'm going to write a novel, often undermines motivation. Sharing process, I'm 30 pages into a writing project, and learning a lot about consistent daily practice tends to strengthen it. When you share process, you're sharing something that already exists. You've already done the work, gotten the experience, learned the lesson. This type of sharing tends to attract helpful feedback and genuine support rather than empty praise. There's also the question of how to handle well-meaning people who push you to share before you're ready. Family members and friends often want to be included in your goals and dreams, and their desire to be supportive can sometimes feel like pressure to share prematurely. I've found it helpful to have a standard response ready for these situations. Thank you for being interested in my growth. I'm working on something meaningful to me, and I'll share more about it when I have something concrete to show you. I really appreciate your support. This acknowledges their care while maintaining your boundary. Most people will respect this approach, especially when you follow through by sharing appropriately later on. Now, let's talk about accountability, because I don't want anyone to think that strategic silence means going it alone. Accountability is incredibly powerful when it's done right. The research shows that effective accountability partnerships have several characteristics. First, they focus on actions rather than intentions. Instead of, "Did you work on your goal this week?" Effective accountability asks, "What specific actions did you take? What did you learn? What obstacles did you encounter?" Second, effective accountability includes both support and challenge. A good accountability partner believes in your capability but won't accept your excuses. They celebrate your progress but also push you to solve problems rather than just venting about them. Third, effective accountability is regular and structured. Weekly check-ins work better than monthly ones. Specific questions work better than general ones. Written progress reports work better than casual conversations. You can practice strategic silence with the general public while still having targeted accountability with specific people. In fact, this combination private development with selective accountability is often the most effective approach. I want to address one more aspect of this topic: the role of social media in goal achievement. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn have made sharing intentions incredibly easy and immediately rewarding. The psychological design of these platforms' likes, comments, shares almost perfectly mimics the validation that can undermine goal achievement. This doesn't mean you need to avoid social media entirely, but it does mean being strategic about how you use it in relation to your goals. Consider using social media to share completed work rather than planned work, to document your journey rather than announce your destination. For example, instead of posting day 1 of my fitness journey, try posting completed my first month of consistent morning walks. Here's what I learned. Instead of starting a new business, try just landed my 3rd client, excited about where this is heading. This shift from intention sharing to progress sharing protects your motivation while still allowing you to connect with others and potentially inspire them through your actual achievements rather than your aspirations. There's something else I want to acknowledge: the emotional challenge of strategic silence. It's not easy to keep meaningful goals to yourself, especially when you're excited about them or when you're struggling with them. Sharing can feel like a natural way to process your experience. This is where having 1 or 2 trusted confidants becomes crucial. These are people who can provide emotional support and perspective without undermining your motivation. They're not necessarily your accountability partners. They might be therapists, mentors, or very close friends who understand the psychology of goal achievement. With these people, you can share your struggles, doubts, and excitement without the goal becoming about their reaction. They provide the emotional processing you need while helping you maintain strategic silence with everyone else. I also want to talk about the shadow side of strategic silence. Like any psychological principle, it can be taken too far. Some people use the concept of not sharing goals as a way to avoid accountability entirely. They tell themselves they're being strategic when they're really being avoidant. True strategic silence is active and intentional. You're not sharing publicly, but you're doing the work. You're building systems, tracking progress, and seeking appropriate feedback. You're actively moving toward your goal, just without the fanfare. If you find yourself using strategic silence as a reason to avoid difficult conversations, professional feedback, or community support, you've probably crossed the line from strategic to avoidant. The goal is not to be antisocial, it's to be selective and intentional about how you use social connection in service of your goals. Let me share one final story that brings all of these concepts together. This is about David, a 52-year-old corporate manager who decided he wanted to become a public speaker. David had always been terrified of public speaking, but watching TED Talks during the pandemic inspired him to consider sharing some of his professional insights with a broader audience. His first instinct was to Google how to become a public speaker, sign up for a course, and then tell his wife and colleagues about his new goal. But David had learned about strategic silence from a previous failed goal. He'd announced a marathon training plan to everyone he knew, then quietly given up after 6 weeks when the initial enthusiasm wore off. This time, he decided to try a different approach. For the first 6 months, David worked on his speaking skills in complete privacy. He practiced presentations alone in his office, recorded himself on his phone, and worked through his anxiety without any external pressure. He read books on storytelling and message design. He attended virtual speaking events as an audience member, studying what worked and what didn't. The work was harder without external encouragement, but it was also more honest. David couldn't hide behind good intentions or other people's enthusiasm. He had to confront his actual skill level and his genuine commitment to improvement. After 6 months, David felt ready for strategic feedback. He identified one colleague who he respected and who had speaking experience, and he asked for specific help. He shared one 5-minute presentation and asked for detailed critique. Based on that feedback, he refined his approach for another month. Only after 7 months of private development did David share his goal publicly, but he shared it as progress, not intention. I've been working on developing my public speaking skills for several months, and I'm excited to announce that I'll be presenting at our industry conference next month. The response was enthusiastic and supportive, but more importantly, it was based on something real. People didn't just say good for you, they shared specific opportunities, offered introductions, and provided resources that actually helped David's continued development. David's speaking career has flourished since then. He's now a regular on the conference circuit in his industry and has started a small speaking business on the side. When I asked him what he would tell others about strategic silence, he said, "It's not about keeping secrets. It's about building something real before you invite others to participate in it." As we near the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with a framework you can start using immediately. I call it the roots, growth, and fruits approach to goal sharing. Roots phase. This is the beginning of your goal journey. You're establishing basic habits, learning fundamental skills, and building the foundation for success. During this phase, practice complete silence with most people. Focus on consistency over intensity, private progress over public recognition. This phase typically lasts 13 months, depending on the goal. Growth phase. You've established basic habits and are seeing initial progress. You have something real to build on. During this phase, seek strategic feedback from 1 or 2 people who can provide specific, actionable guidance. Share your process and challenges, but still avoid broadly announcing your goal. This phase usually lasts another 24 months. Fruits phase. You're seeing meaningful results and have demonstrated genuine capability. Your new habits feel natural, and you have proof of concept for your goal. Now you can share more broadly, but share your achievements and progress rather than your future intentions. Use this sharing to open doors, find collaborators, and inspire others through example. This framework isn't rigid. Different goals will move through these phases at different speeds, but it provides a structure for thinking strategically about when and how you share. Remember, the goal isn't to never share your dreams and aspirations. The goal is to share them in a way that supports achievement rather than undermining it. Sometimes that means staying quiet when every instinct tells you to announce. Sometimes it means finding the courage to be vulnerable with someone who can actually help. The research is clear, and the stories are consistent. People who master strategic silence achieve their goals more often and with less stress. They're not more disciplined or more talented, they're just more strategic about how they use social connection in service of their growth. Strategic silence isn't about becoming isolated or secretive. It's about being intentional. It's about understanding that your goals are precious and that they deserve to be protected during their most vulnerable phase. It's about choosing depth over breadth, substance over appearance, real progress over social approval. In our hyper-connected world, the ability to stay quiet about your goals until they're strong enough to flourish in public view is becoming a superpower. It's a skill that separates those who achieve from those who just announce, those who build from those who just dream. I want to leave you with 3 questions to reflect on. What goal are you working on that might benefit from more silence? Who in your life provides genuine accountability versus empty encouragement? And what would change if you focused on building before sharing, on doing before announcing? The path to achieving your most meaningful goals might be quieter than you think. But quiet doesn't mean inactive, and silence doesn't mean isolation. It means being strategic, being intentional, and being patient enough to let your goals develop roots before expecting them to bear fruit. Thank you for joining me today on this exploration of strategic silence. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it, but maybe wait until you've put some of these ideas into practice first. As always, you can find additional resources and research in the description below to help you dive deeper into the psychology of goal achievement. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say about your goals is nothing at all. Your future self will thank you for the silence that made their success possible.